is going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So if you've been following the channel for any bit of time, you have seen the engine that we're building for our super cheap turbo Civic. We have it right here behind me. It is a D16 Y8 that we picked up for 150 bucks off of Facebook Marketplace. We completely tore that thing down, went through it, we filled the block with epoxy, we put some Eagle connecting rods, some Vitara pistons, a new Z6 crankshaft, a comp cam, and hand ported the head, along with some Crowler valve springs. So we've completely gone through this engine, and this thing is finally ready to make some jam. So today we're going to be pulling the super cheap turbo Civic into the garage here. We'll get the bone stock JDM D15B pulled out of that thing and start getting ready to set this one down in it. If you guys haven't seen those videos, make sure to go back on the Honda playlist and check them out. We've got a video on every single thing that we've done to this budget engine, and I think this thing's going to make some good power, especially once we slap on our maxpeedingrods GT3076R. So let's get through the intro, we'll get the car fired up and rolled in here, and start yanking that old engine out. So as you guys seen, we got this thing fired up and backed into the garage, and of course I couldn't help myself. We had to bounce it off the two-step a couple times just to say farewell to this little D15B. So now that we've got it in the garage here, we can get to work. First thing I'm gonna do, obviously let it cool down a little bit, but we'll get it up on stands, start pulling the turbo off. We're gonna be reusing this turbo and then the turbo kit as well, so we'll get all that stuff disconnected, set off to the side. I can leave the turbo manifold and the intake manifold on here for now. We'll deal with it when we get it out. Disconnect all of our catch can lines and a bunch of other wiring that we need to do, drain the coolant, all the good things, disconnect boost control, stuff like that. This video is not going to be a perfect step-by-step how to pull the engine out of your turbo Civic. We have a video dedicated to that on the Honda playlist where I went through and I showed you guys exactly what you needed to do to get your engine out when we did the manual swap. So today's video is not going to be that. It's going to be more of let's get this thing out. I'll show you guys what we run into and any fun or funny things along the way. Then we'll get ready to set our new fully built engine down in here. And as long as we don't run into any unforeseen issues, I'd really like to have the new motor drop down in here and ready to fire up by the end of today's video. So let's get to work. We've got a bunch of stuff to do. Let's get this thing pulled on out. Now that we've got this thing up on stands, we're going to start tearing into it. Now, if you guys have been following the channel for any bit of time, you know that I label just about everything, especially if I'm not sure. So I'm going to go through and do a bunch of labeling real quick. And like I said, we'll start with the charge piping, get that off and out of our way. Start disconnecting vacuum lines. As soon as the turbo cools down, we'll get that off and out of our way. Same with the downpipe and stuff. So we're going to go ahead, start labeling some stuff, and just get to work. Undo our VBAND at the turbo here. Oh, drip oil everywhere. Now we've got a lot more room to work. So like I said, I think I'm gonna leave the manifold right on the engine until we're ready to pull it. We're gonna have to disconnect our clutch line. We'll probably just disconnect it here because we're taking the transmission right out with it. It's just easier most times. So we'll get that line disconnected here in a minute. We've got an engine mount we made here, a couple engine mounts all the way around, and then some electrical stuff that's gotta come off. So let's go ahead and get that done so we can start pulling this thing out. Alright guys, so not sure if you can see it, but we went through here, got both CV axles out, we got them disconnected from the transmission. We did decide to go ahead and drain the transmission so that we didn't get oil all over the place. So we've got all of that done. Like I mentioned earlier, all the wiring is pulled out. I took the clutch slave cylinder off, and we've just got that hanging out of the way for now. Next thing that we're gonna work on doing is I'm gonna drain the engine oil and get the oil filter off, because we have a line that goes to one of those sandwich adapter plates that's back there that goes to my oil pressure gauge, and then one goes to the oil feed for the turbo. So I'm gonna try to get that plate off the engine and just leave it hanging there so that we don't have to mess with those lines at all. Once we get that done, we are finally ready to start undoing some motor mounts and get this thing pulled on out of here. So as you guys can see, we got the engine hoist in here. We're ready to pluck this thing out. So the only things left to do is we've got this one motor mount bolt right here, this nut, and then we've got the upper bolt on that side mount. I already undid that one and our transmission mount that we made. So we're gonna go ahead and put a little tension on the hoist. We'll undo both of those and we'll just slow and steady pull this thing up out of here. It's mainly just this wiring harness right there. Just watch that.
Yeah, almost passed it already.
Yeah, I'm clear pretty much of everything. When this goes down, it might, engine might go up or down. No, not bad.
To that one lip.
Bring her down. Now we can come down with it.
Yep, bring her down. Spill on antifreeze.
Alright, this thing is out. So as you guys seen, we went ahead and got the engine pulled out. First thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna pull the turbo manifold off this thing. 12 mil bolts, just go through, zap that thing off so that we can reposition our hoist point, because I wanna get the hoist off of the transmission side here so that we can hang this thing, pull the transmission right off of it. We need to take the flywheel off of this thing, the transmission, and then we can set that aside for the new engine. So let's go ahead and get the turbo manifold off, and then we will work from there. There we go. She's coming. Got it.
There you go. Now balance is better too.
Perfect. Dude, that clutch looks brand new. What a shame.
Look at that, pretty.
Yep, that's what I just put on.
Yep.
That's a shame. But the new one's prettier, so that's okay.
Painted red?
Yeah, it is.
All right.
We like red. Why wasn't this one painted?
Cheaper?
All right. Now we can set the transmission off to the side for a minute. I'll worry about the clutch and flywheel and all that stuff in a little while. I think I'm going to clean up the transmission, haven't decided yet. Then we can lift this thing back in the air, start stripping down what we need off of it, get our new one over here, and start putting everything on it. So we can set this off to the side because, like I said, we are going to reuse this little fitting and this 10AN line. I don't know if you guys can tell, but this clutch is literally basically brand new. The flywheel still looks brand new. The clutch basically is brand new. It's a stage 1 from Exceedi, and this thing drove phenomenal. It literally drove like a stock car. I couldn't be happier with it. The only reason we're replacing it is because I don't think it's going to hold up to the power we're trying to make. So I'm going to go ahead and set this off to the side, and then we can pull this flywheel off because we need that as well. Alright, now we've got this off. There's not much more we need off this engine, and then we can start putting our new one together. Alright guys, so I got a little sidetracked cleaning the engine bay while we had the engine and transmission out. So I grabbed a can of this cast coat aluminum. It's the same stuff that we used on the engine block, so I figured might as well hit the transmission quick. I didn't go crazy with prep work like we did on the block, but hopefully it sticks. We're just going to go ahead and try to clean this thing up a little bit. So we'll get this shaken up, and then we can start hitting it with a couple coats. Alright, we'll give it a few minutes to dry and we'll hit it with another coat. So now that we're getting ready to drop this engine into the car, this is the intake manifold that we're going to be using. This is off a D16Y8. Now before we go ahead and throw this on the engine, as you guys seen a few videos back when we were building that engine, I did go through and fully port the cylinder heads, and I did match the gaskets. So we port matched it using the intake manifold gasket. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing with this intake. So we're just going to take our gasket, set it up where it belongs like so, get it all lined up, take a Sharpie, and we will trace this out. It's probably hard to see on camera, but there is quite a bit of material in here. I'm not going to mess around with it too much up by the injectors because I want to leave that pretty much the way it is. But all around the actual intake port itself, we're going to take some material off, and we're going to do it very similar to how we did it when porting the head. So I've done a bunch of porting videos. I'm not going to go crazy in depth on this. You can go back on the channel. We've ported throttle bodies, intake manifolds, cylinder heads, all kinds of stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and bang this out real quick so that we can move on to getting this thing installed. So as you guys can see, we've got metal chips everywhere, and we did go ahead and get this thing finished up. Not going to go into crazy detail. Like I said, if you want to see porting, make sure to go back on the channel. We've got a bunch of porting videos. But if we take the gasket and set it up on there now, get it lined up, you can see that it is port matched much better than it was. So we don't have any brutal steps or anything there anymore. It's a nice smooth transition for the airflow into the engine. So next thing that we want to do is take this outside. We're going to wash it out really, really good. Make sure that we get any bits of debris or any metal shavings out of this thing so it doesn't get sucked into our brand new freshly built engine. So we've got some other stuff that we want to clean up while we're at it. So we'll take this outside with a few other things, get them washed up, so that we can finally get ready to start assembly. So we're gonna go ahead and test fit this, make sure it all works, and then slap it together. So just real quick, if we go to set this on here, it does look like this was designed for a Y8, so I'm pretty sure we got lucky with that deal. So we're gonna get our injector switched over. Hopefully everything bolts right up and we don't have to make any little spacers. So we're gonna go ahead, get the injectors pulled out, get them cleaned up a little bit, and start slapping them in our Y8 manifold. So it looks like our new AEM fuel rail did come with injector O-rings. So we're gonna get these swapped onto those caps, and then we'll start putting them all together. Boom, they fit way better in the AEM rails than they did in the stock rail. So I'll go ahead, get the rest of the injector slapped in here, and then we can start bolting this thing down. Alright, so we've got all 4 injectors installed in the rail, just like so. Now we're going to go ahead and test fit it on the little stands here, the pedestals for the rail. See if they're the proper height or if we're going to have to modify anything. So with the new AEM fuel rail, the pedestals did not reach the mounting hardware for the fuel rail. So what I had to do was I actually found these 6mm by 1.0 couplers, and then I took the stock pedestal and I cut them down. So we cut the top stud down a decent little bit, and then we made these little couplers cut to size so that they fit on there. Then we're gonna bolt this to the intake manifold. This will be right under the fuel rail, and then we have a bolt that will also thread into this coupler. So let's get this thing mounted up. We are finally ready to install the new Y8 intake manifold. So we're gonna be using Felpro part number 91485, and we'll go ahead and get this gasket slid on here real quick. And as you guys can see, once we get this gasket seated up, we did port match the cylinder head when we were porting it to this gasket. So it actually came out really, really good. I'm super happy with it. Not too sure how well you guys can see it on camera, but we did a really good job getting this thing port matched all the way around to this gasket. So we picked that gasket up a while ago so that we could do that. The ports came out really nice, and then as you've seen, we did the same thing to the manifold. So we'll go ahead and grab our intake manifold. And as you guys can see, we've got that nice new AEM fuel rail on this thing, looking nice. So we'll go ahead and get this thing set on here carefully. Just like so. Now that we've got our intake manifold on here, we're gonna go ahead and tighten down the bolt, starting in the center, working our way out. If you guys wanna know the torque, I believe it's 17 foot-pounds. We're gonna go just about tight enough. It'd be kind of tricky to get a torque wrench in there, so I'm just gonna judge it with a wrench. Alright, we got that all tightened down, torqued down. Now we can move on to the next thing. So now that we're at a point where we're ready to install the flywheel and the clutch, we've got our new clutch here, and this is the flywheel that we're gonna be using. This is a factory style, factory weight flywheel. We installed it when we did the stage 1 clutch, and we only put a few thousand miles on it. It looks plenty clean. I brake cleaned it, hit it with some Scotch-Brite real quick. I think this thing's gonna be perfectly fine. So we can go ahead and open up our new clutch. This is the competition clutch stage 4. It is part number 8022-1620. So like I said, stage 4. We'll get this thing opened up. And as you guys can see, it is a different design than the clutch that we used to run. Our old one was the stage 1 solid disc all the way around. This one is more of a puck style clutch. This one happens to be a 6-puck, and we did want to stay with a sprung disc, but we'll go ahead and set that off to the side. Open up the rest of this, and it looks like we have got a nice little install kit here, and then we've got our pressure plate. So nice fancy little pressure plate to go along with this stage 4 clutch. And then the install kit comes with a pilot bearing and our throwout bearing. So we should be good to go. Also has an alignment tool in there. So we can set this stuff off to the side. We'll get the flywheel thrown onto the engine and torqued down. Then we can start setting up our new clutch. So we've got the old pilot bearing out. We're gonna go ahead and get our new one installed. Alright, should be good to go. Let's go ahead and get this thrown on the engine. We'll put some Loctite on the bolts and get this thing torqued down. Now we can go ahead and start Loctiting all the other ones in. Now that we've got Loctite on the bolts for the flywheel, we're going to torque this thing down. So the book calls for 87 foot-pounds. We're going to start at 50 in a crisscross pattern, and then we'll bump it up to the 87. Flywheel is torqued down. Now we can grab the pressure plate and start getting that bolted on. Now that we've got the clutch and pressure plate mounted up to the flywheel, you want to make sure that your alignment pin goes in and out nice and easy so we don't have any issues with that. The torque spec for these bolts is 19 foot-pounds, but once again, I'm going to go like half of that in a crisscross pattern, and then we'll go back over it once again at the 19 foot-pounds. Now that we've got the flywheel and the pressure plate all torqued down, we can grab the transmission and get that prepped to go back together. So I've got the clutch fork and the throwout bearing right here, and we're going to simply slide it over the clutch fork. Slide this into place. We did put a little bit of grease on it. You don't need much. You don't want a bunch of grease flinging around in here, so be careful how much grease you put on there. Barely visible, basically. We can get that in place. And now we can just slide this spring right over the ball right there, and we are good to go, just like so. Now some of these do have a spring here. We got this transmission secondhand. It's been together for a while without a spring there. I'm not sure if this one's supposed to have one or not, but like I said, we've ran it for a long time without one, so we're going to continue to run it just as it is because I don't have one even if I wanted to run one. So we're going to throw it together just like this for now. I think it's going to be perfectly fine, and we will get this thing bolted back up to the engine. You can get it lined So we just went ahead and carefully stuck this thing on. Typical GoPro turned off on us. But we've got it sucked up flush now. Everything seemed to line up pretty good. We'll snug these up more once the engine's stationary, but for now, it's doing pretty good. We can go ahead and get ready to set this thing in the engine bay. All right, guys, so after I got the transmission bolted back up to the engine block, I went ahead and got this thing dressed up a little bit more. We threw our catch can line on there that goes to the back of the block, and we're gonna have another one that comes off this valve cover, but we'll worry about that later. I went ahead and got the transmission lower brace on there that goes to the oil pan rail. Threw a little bit of paint on the front of the oil pan where that bung was welded on for the oil drain. We've got everything else that we need, for the most part, bolted onto the engine and transmission so that we can set this thing down into the engine bay. So we've got some things moved out of the way. We're gonna get this engine hoist rolled in here and try setting this thing down. This engine hoist landed in a horrible spot. It's right in the crack in the cement between that and where the blacktop starts. This one fell right into place, all on its own. That back one's getting there. Let me grab a bolt for it. Trying to get this rearmost engine mount started. We've got it lined up. We're just trying to get the bolt ran in. All right, we've got 3 of the motor mounts started. The only one left to do is the front torque mount that we built for the transmission that's solid. We have a solid mount over there, solid mount here, and then these 2 are still rubber. We were gonna make them solid, we just didn't get around to it, so we'll keep running it as it is. But I'm gonna go ahead and get these all tightened up, and then we can move on to actually bolting some things up. Now that we've got our new engine sitting down in there, this thing looks really nice. I'm glad we went ahead and painted the transmission case as well. Everything's just looking really good. Once we get the turbo manifold on here, this thing's gonna look real good. So I did forget to put the alternator on though. I always put those on before we set the engine in. I completely forgot, so we're gonna have to try to snake that down in there. And then we've also got our solid transmission mount I made, so we'll get that bolted up. But before we get the alternator on, I want to get the oil filter sandwich adapter plate bolted back up so that we have our oil pressure gauge and our AN line for the turbo feed hooked up. So I'm going to go ahead and get some of that stuff done, and then just a whole bunch of wiring, and we'll get this thing one step closer to being ready to fire up. We can throw our solid transmission mount on here that we made. It's like a 3-piece design. I just made it out of some metal we had laying around. Then we can take our second piece here. Our piece that goes over to the actual solid mount on the frame. It's a little over-engineered, but that's what we made with what we had, and it seems to work. It definitely stiffened the engine up. Without that, you could feel the engine moving when you'd get on it. The whole shifter and everything would move. Once we put that on there, everything stays nice and solid. So we've got that, and then that one over there is solid as well. So all right, now that we got that on, we can start running some of the lines that we need to and a bunch of electrical stuff. Now I'm gonna go ahead and get the clutch slave cylinder back installed. Now that we've got the transmission mount and the clutch slave cylinder installed, we can go ahead and start feeding this electrical back under the manifold to the other side. So a couple little things that I noticed going from the JDM D15B to this Y8 that we built. When we went to get the alternator in there, which we did end up getting in there, we quickly found out that the alternator mounting bracket, the top one, is actually slightly different. So if we look at the old one that we have right over here, this is the one that came off of it. And as you guys can see, it's this big assembly. Well, the one that belongs on this Y8 is actually from where my thumb is right here up. That's all it is. It's just that little sliding bracket. So luckily we had the one off this Y8 engine, and we went ahead and slapped it on there. So we've got the alternator all bolted up, but we just ran into a similar thing with the power steering bracket. So you guys can see I've still got the mounting bracket on this pump right here. And then I tried to get it bolted up, it wouldn't fit, so I had to grab this one off of the Y8 block. I had this just chilling out there with some other parts, and I was able to find it, and this one bolts up to the block and head perfectly fine. So I'm going to get the power steering pump switched over from that bracket to that bracket, and we will get it tightened up to the block. I also went ahead and started getting some of the electrical stuff ran. This thing is a mess for wiring because obviously it had an automatic in it when we got it. And I haven't wanted to go through and cut that wiring out yet. We're probably going to do it once we get this one running. I'll go through, cut a bunch of stuff, because we're going to have to send wires to the ECU for our new VTEC solenoid, since we don't have any wiring for that, since this car never had VTEC. So I'll probably pick some electrical that we're not using for the transmission, the automatic trans, and tap into that wire because it already gets sent all the way to the ECU. So we're going to see what we want to do when we get to that point, but for now I'm just getting some hard parts bolted up. Gonna go ahead, get the injectors plugged in, and just keep plugging away at this thing, quite literally. So the next thing that we're gonna work on is getting this AC bracket in there. Car currently doesn't have AC, but the long-term plan is to get AC back on this thing. So we're going to put the bracket in. We do have the tensioner with this one. This one came off of this Y8. So we're going to get that bolted back up in there. So in the future, all we need to do is slap a pump on it. So we'll get that thrown on and then just keep plugging away at this thing. All right, we got that all bolted up. Now we can move on to something else. All right, guys, so the next thing that we're gonna do is start getting the distributor put in here. But before we can do that, we need to get the #1 cylinder to top dead center so that we know where we need to line up our distributor. So I'm just gonna use this right here. I think it's an old piece of brazing rod. I use it for this all the time. I'm just gonna go ahead, drop that down in there, and then we'll turn the engine over until we find top dead center for the cylinder. I'd say right there is top dead center for number 1. So now we can grab our distributor, and we're gonna have to get that lined up, and I'll show you guys how we're gonna do that. So now that we've got the number 1 cylinder at top dead center, we're gonna grab our distributor, and it's very easy to install this 180 degrees out because it just has this gear that can go one of 2 ways. So it's very easy to put it in the incorrect way. But the way we're gonna be doing it is you hold your distributor in the direction that it's gonna be getting bolted up. Then you take your cap, and in our case, I marked which one goes to each cylinder. So this is cylinder number 1 right here, which would land right about in this area. And then you want to turn your rotor until it lines up close to that number 1 cylinder and where it's going to be going into the actual engine. So as long as you're close there, you should be good to go. Like I said, you could turn it 180 and you will be 180 degrees off time. So we can go ahead and get this bolted up because ours looks like it lines up good, and we can move on to the next thing. So I'm just going to get the bolts thrown in it here, and we'll snug it down. And then once we get this thing running, we will check it with a timing light to see where we want to set this, because as you can see, we can move this a good little amount there. So we're just going to go ahead and probably put it somewhere in the center for now, and then we will go from there. Alright, we can plug in all the wires and move on to the next task. Next thing that we're going to do is get the radiator thrown back in here. So we are still using just a factory radiator. Seems to be doing the job perfectly fine for the moment. We'll get the fan plugged in. Get the tank drop down in place. And now we can go ahead and hook our coolant lines up real quick. The little holder here for this hose would normally go the opposite way, but since we have our custom mount over here, I went ahead and flipped it around because then it kind of holds the hose away from our catch can and our trans mount. So that's good to go. I'm going to tighten up those hose clamps, and then the next thing that we're going to do is throw the axles back in it. Alright, make sure you've got it seated on the transmission end. Now we can get the splines of the axle through the hub here. I like to take a little bit of grease and put some on the splines of the axle or the hub, or both. Just a little bit to keep it from seizing if it stays together for a long time. Then once you get it lined up, it'll drop right together just like that. I'm going to throw the axle nut on it for now. We're not going to tighten that up just yet. Now I'm going to go ahead and throw the lower ball joint back in its place. Just like so. Then we can grab the castle nut that goes on it. Throw this on, and then we'll need a cotter pin. Throw a cotter pin in it, and call it good. Now we can go ahead and tighten down the axle nut. Now that we've got the axle nut tightened down, I'm going to go ahead and stake it, basically just to keep it from coming loose. So there's a notch in the axle right here, and we're just going to... Alright, that should be plenty fine. So we're good down here. All the suspension, axles, and everything is buttoned up. Now we can go up top and start finishing everything else up. Now we can go ahead and tighten up the fitting that will adapt from our aftermarket AEM fuel rail over to the factory line and filter set up here. Tight on that. Go ahead and get the line installed. That should be tight enough. We'll check for leaks before we fire this thing up. So now that we've got that done, I think we're going to move to getting some vacuum lines ran, and then we've got to get the turbo and manifold hooked up. Alright, we're going to go ahead and slap our exhaust manifold gasket on. I usually like using the MLS steel style ones, but this is what I had, so this is what we're going to use. This is, I believe, a Felpro 94118-1. So we're going to go ahead and get this gasket thrown in here. Might rewrap this later, but I'm just trying to get this thing running right now. There we go. Got that seated up. Go ahead and get all the nuts and bolts started. Now I'm going to go ahead and just tighten them down real quick. Then we can grab the turbo and start mocking some stuff up. We are finally ready to start setting our turbo back on. Go ahead and try to get this all lined up. Of course the camera died, but we did go ahead and get the turbo bolted up. We've got the charge piping started. All of our vacuum lines and lines going to the wastegate are hooked up and ready to go. Now the next thing I'm going to do is throw some transmission fluid in this thing before we put that charge pipe on because it gets in the way. I usually use Royal Purple, but they didn't have any at the local hardware store today, so we're going to use some Synchromesh from Pennzoil. Go ahead and get this thing thrown in there. I'm going to put 2 quarts in. I think it takes 1.9. We'll fit 2. And then we can throw that charge pipe on and start buttoning up some final things to hopefully try to start this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and make a hole in this bottle because it should take this whole quart. Alright, this one's empty. I'm going to grab another one and we can go ahead and dump it in. Sadly, I can't poke the hole in the next one because we are going to need to stop probably. It's probably going to make a mess if I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the next one and we will top this thing off. So this thing is getting really close. We're just trying to button up some last little things here. So we had to make a new fuel return line because the one we had was for the other engine and the regulator was kind of aimed differently. So I went ahead and just took some rubber fuel line and extended the factory return because it is a hard line up to the firewall. So we were able to just swap out the rubber portion here. And we're just going to run it something like that, have it loop over, zip tie it with all of our other lines that run up right here. And that should be perfectly fine. So we'll get this thing tightened down and the fuel system will basically be done. We'll start throwing our charge piping back on. So as you guys can see, I got a few more little things buttoned up here. I went ahead and made the coolant lines that go to our turbo. I hooked up the throttle cable and started getting all of our vacuum line ran for the blow-off valve. Now sadly, we are still waiting on an idle air control valve relocation bracket. Since the Y8 manifold does not have a provision for one, honestly, I forgot all about it, so I had to order that bracket up last night, and it should be here very soon. And then the only other main thing that we need to get done is I need to get the VTEC solenoid wired up into our Honda S300 so that we can control that thing properly. Now, I did forget to pick up some conventional oil when I was out the other day, so I'll have to get some of that as well. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's video right here. So in the next video, we will get this thing finished up and fired up for the very first time. And if this rain will quit, we will finally be able to take it for a ride with its new built engine. So as always, I appreciate you guys for checking out the channel. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, ring that bell, and check us out on all of our other social media platforms. Facebook, TikTok, and Bought to Build Official on Instagram. And we will catch you on the next one.